The forest was alive with the sounds of twilight, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a hawk, and the low growls of creatures moving unseen among the trees. The young hunter moved cautiously along the worn trail that led to his cabin, his senses finely tuned to every sound and movement. He had grown up in these woods, learning from his father the art of survival, how to track game, read the signs of danger, and respect the untamed wilderness. Yet even he felt a shiver of unease that evening, as if the forest itself was whispering a warning he could not ignore. Suddenly, a sharp, terrified scream pierced the dusk, cutting through the familiar sounds of the woods. The hunter froze, his hand instinctively going to the bough slung across his shoulder. The cry was human, a woman's voice, strained with panic and desperation. Without hesitation, he followed the sound, moving quickly but silently, weaving through the dense underbrush. The forest seemed to tighten around him as he approached a small clearing. There, illuminated by the fading light, he saw her, a young Navajo woman, her long dark hair tangled with leaves, her dress torn and soiled, standing frozen in fear. Surrounding her were several wolves, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, their teeth bared in menacing anticipation. They circled her with the patience of predators who had smelled weakness. The hunter's pulse quickened. Wolves were dangerous enough alone, but a pack could easily overpower even the strongest human. Yet retreat was not an option. He could not leave her to such a fate. Drawing an arrow from his quiver, the hunter assessed the situation with careful precision. He needed to act decisively. The wolves were too close for a ranged attack on all of them at once, so he relied on his knowledge of the terrain and the creatures themselves. He made himself visible to the largest wolf, shouting and waving his arms to draw its attention. The wolf lunged toward him, and the hunter narrowly sidestepped, loosing an arrow that struck true. Another wolf attacked from the side, and he used his knife to deflect the fangs snapping inches from his hand. The battle was chaotic, a whirlwind of movement and instinct. Despite the danger, the hunter remained focused, guiding the wolves away from the woman while ensuring none could escape and flank him. Slowly, methodically, he drove them back, his every motion a blend of experience, courage, and sheer determination. The woman, though terrified, watched in awe, her initial fear tempered by the realization that this stranger risked his life for her. His presence, his skill, and his courage provided a fragile thread of hope in a situation that had seemed hopeless moments before. Finally, the pack, either driven off by his relentless defense or intimidated by his calculated attacks, retreated into the shadows of the forest. Silence fell again, broken only by the hunter's heavy breathing and the woman's shaky inhalations. She collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face, gratitude and relief mingling with lingering fear. The hunter lowered his weapon slowly, keeping a wary eye on the dark tree line, knowing that while the immediate danger had passed, the wilderness always held new threats. He approached her cautiously, offering a hand and a reassuring voice, though words felt inadequate against the terror she had just endured. In that moment, a connection formed between them, born of crisis, trust, and the shared understanding that life on the frontier demanded resilience. Unspoken questions hung in the air. Who was she, and why had she been in the forest alone? But for now, survival took precedence over inquiry. He would ensure she lived to see another day, even if the forest, and the world beyond it, remained an unpredictable and dangerous place. This encounter, a single act of bravery, would set the stage for challenges, alliances, and the deepening bond between two people from worlds that often feared one another. Dawn filtered through the dense canopy of the forest, casting slanted beams of pale light onto the rough-hewn cabin where the hunter had brought the Navajo woman after the night's harrowing encounter. Inside, the air smelled of pine, smoke, and the faint musky scent of the forest that clung to the hunter's clothing. The woman sat on a simple wooden bench, still trembling, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her dark eyes darted around, wary and alert, as if expecting the wolves or worse. Humans do return at any moment. The hunter moved quietly around the cabin, tending to the small fire in the hearth. Though he had lived alone for years, the presence of another human, especially one so vulnerable and foreign to his world, felt both disconcerting and strangely comforting. He offered her water in a small tin cup, but she shook her head, barely touching it. The gesture, simple as it was, marked the first tentative bridge between them, a silent acknowledgement of trust. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Trying to convey reassurance without imposing, she hesitated, glancing down at the torn hem of her dress and the scratches along her arms. "A little, but it's nothing," she replied softly, her accent carrying the gentle lilt of her Navajo homeland. Her words were polite but cautious. She did not yet know if this man could be trusted. Her eyes studied him, noting the sharpness in his gaze, the strength in his hands, the way he moved with the quiet confidence of someone entirely at home in the wild. The hunter nodded, accepting her answer, though he knew better. Small injuries could fester if left untreated, and the forest was unforgiving. He rummaged through a wooden chest and produced some clean cloth and salve. "Let me tend to them," he said simply. There was no question in his tone, only a firm offer of help. After a moment of hesitation, she allowed him to clean and bandage the cuts, her trust growing incrementally with each careful movement. As the morning passed, conversation began to bridge the silence. He asked her name, her origins, and why she had been alone in the forest. She answered in measured tones, revealing fragments of her life, a young woman traveling through the woods, caught by circumstance and misfortune, wary of both nature and man. The hunter, in turn, spoke sparingly of his own past, sharing only enough to illustrate that he, too, had endured solitude and danger. There was an unspoken tension between them. He was aware of the dangers outsiders posed. Settlers in nearby towns often distrusted Navajo people, seeing them as threats rather than allies. She, meanwhile, was conscious of her vulnerability, both as a woman in a harsh frontier and as someone unfamiliar with this man's world. Yet necessity had forged an uneasy alliance. She needed shelter. He needed someone whose presence did not endanger his solitary existence. Through shared meals of simple bread and roasted game, they began to navigate this fragile companionship. Each learned to read the other's cues, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the careful way he checked the cabin's perimeter. Mutual respect started to take root alongside a quiet curiosity about the other's life and culture. They were two strangers bound by circumstance. Discovering that cooperation, even in the unforgiving wilderness, could be more powerful than fear. By late afternoon, the shadows outside deepened, and the hunter's instincts, honed through years of solitary vigilance, alerted him to movement beyond the trees. Small signs, nearly imperceptible, footprints, broken twigs, the faint scent of smoke. He did not yet know whether it was wolves, settlers, or another danger entirely. He merely tightened his grip on the bough, signaling to the woman to stay close. Their fragile trust would soon be tested in ways neither could anticipate. This day marked the beginning of their partnership, a delicate balance of caution, gratitude, and the unspoken understanding that survival in the frontier required unity, even among strangers. By evening, both recognized that their fates were intertwined, for better or worse, in the wild world that lay just beyond the cabin door. Night fell over the forest like a heavy velvet curtain, muting the colors of the world and sharpening the sounds that the hunter and the Navajo woman had come to rely upon inside the cabin. Shadows danced across the rough walls, cast by the flickering fire in the hearth. The air was thick with tension. Both were aware that the wilderness offered no rest, and that danger often came in the quietest moments. Wolves, long driven off by the hunter earlier, might return, and human settlers or bandits could be lurking just beyond the tree line. The night was alive with threat, yet it was also a time for reflection, for the bond between the two strangers to deepen under extraordinary circumstances. The hunter moved with careful precision, inspecting each window and door. Every latch, every crack in the wooden walls was checked and reinforced as needed. He did not speak much. Words were unnecessary when actions conveyed vigilance. The woman watched him, a mixture of awe and apprehension in her eyes. She had spent much of her life learning to navigate the world with caution, But here she realized she could not do so alone. This man, though foreign to her culture, had proven himself capable and courageous in the forest, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something approaching trust once he felt the cabin was secure. The hunter turned his attention to her. "We'll need to keep watch," he said quietly. "The wolves may be gone, but humans can be just as dangerous." She nodded. Her lips pressed into a thin line, though she had never known a man like him. She understood the truth in his words. Life in the frontier demanded constant vigilance, and the slightest lapse could mean death. They took turns keeping watch, their shifts punctuated by the quiet crackle of the fire. During her turn, the woman listened intently to the forest outside, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a wolf, the snap of a twig under some unseen foot. Each sound was a signal, a potential warning of what might come. When it was the hunter's turn, he watched her closely, noting the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands trembled as she gripped the small knife he had offered. He did not speak, only offered a reassuring glance that told her she was not alone. As the hours dragged on, conversation began to emerge between them, low and cautious at first. Then, gradually more open, the woman spoke of her homeland, of the vast deserts and sacred mountains of the Navajo people, places that were as alien to the hunter as the forest was to her in turn. He shared stories of life in the wilderness, the rhythm of the seasons, the delicate balance between predator and prey, the constant challenge of surviving in a world that respected neither mercy nor weakness. Through these exchanges, they learned to understand each other, even as the night pressed in around them, yet the sense of impending danger never fully dissipated. Strange noises in the distance, footsteps that did not match the patterns of wildlife, faint voices carried by the wind kept both on edge. The woman realized that her presence might attract unwanted attention, while the hunter understood that his solitary life had been irrevocably altered by this encounter. Together, they crafted simple strategies, moving quietly, listening for patterns, and preparing for any threat that might come. Each suggestion, each shared decision, further cemented the fragile alliance forming between them. By the time the moon climbed high above the treetops, both were exhausted but alert. The night had tested them, revealing their vulnerabilities and strengths alike. They had survived the wolves, but the forest and the world beyond it remained a place of uncertainty and peril. Sitting side by the fire, they allowed themselves a brief moment of quiet reflection, understanding that their bond, though born of necessity, had become essential. The night's threats had not been vanquished, only postponed. The forest whispered warnings, and both knew that with the first light of dawn a new danger awaited, one not of nature, but of men. Yet they faced it with a growing sense of unity, prepared to meet whatever challenges the frontier might bring. The seeds of trust and cooperation had been sown, and from these seeds would grow resilience, courage, and the strength to face the unknown together. The first light of dawn crept across the forest, pale and fragile, cutting through the darkness that had shrouded the cabin all night. Birds began to stir, and the soft rustle of leaves hinted at the normal rhythm of life in the wilderness. But for the young hunter and the Navajo woman, the morning brought no relief, only a new and more dangerous challenge through the gaps in the cabin's walls. The hunter noticed movement, figures in the distance, cautiously approaching, yet numerous and organized. It took only a moment for him to recognize them as settlers from the nearby town. Their intentions were unclear, but their presence carried the unmistakable weight of suspicion and hostility. The hunter's heart sank. He had faced wolves, storms, and countless natural threats. Yet this felt different. Humans, driven by fear, prejudice, or greed, often posed dangers far greater than any animal. He turned to the woman, whispering a warning, and she immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. The fear in her eyes was tempered by resolve. She had survived the wolves, and she would not be so easily intimidated now. Together, they assessed their options. The settlers were numerous, armed, and moving with purpose. Surrounding the cabin, methodically escape by brute force, was impossible. As the settlers drew closer, tension tightened like a bowstring. The hunter stepped outside briefly to gauge their formation. Returning quickly with a grim report, the settlers were suspicious of her, perhaps assuming she was a threat, or blaming her presence for unknown troubles. He realized the confrontation could escalate quickly, and any misstep might lead to violence inside. He repositioned simple defenses, barricading doors, sharpening stakes near the entrances, and ensuring the woman had a place to move quietly and safely when the settlers finally reached the cabin's perimeter. Their leader, a burly man with a stern face and a rifle slung across his shoulder, spoke first. His voice was authoritative, edged with suspicion. "Step outside, we know she's here, no tricks." The hunter met his gaze evenly, understanding that words alone would not guarantee safety. Yet they could buy a moment to assess the intentions of the group. The woman, standing slightly behind him, kept silent but alert, ready to act at a signal. Negotiation became a delicate dance. The hunter explained the circumstances as calmly as possible, how he had rescued her from the wolves, that she meant no harm, and that his cabin was a place of refuge, not a threat. But the settlers were wary, their distrust of outsiders, especially Native Americans, deeply ingrained. Some whispered among themselves. Others gripped their weapons tightly. Eyes flicking between the hunter and the woman, tension thickened with every passing second. The slightest movement could ignite violence inside the cabin. The hunter and woman worked in silent coordination. He watched for the settlers' weaknesses, noting the gaps in their formation, the slight hesitations in their movements. She, learning quickly from him, helped reinforce small defenses. Moving quietly and efficiently together, they embodied a fragile balance of cooperation and strategy, each action aimed at preventing bloodshed while safeguarding their lives. As the sun climbed higher, the standoff reached its peak. The settlers' impatience grew, yet the hunter's calm determination, combined with the woman's poise, prevented immediate conflict. Their shared experience of danger in the forest had prepared them to act with intelligence and courage under pressure. The cabin, though small and simple, became a fortress of resilience, a place where quick thinking and trust could outweigh brute force. By midday, the first cracks in the settlers' resolve appeared. They had underestimated the hunter's skill and the woman's resourcefulness, though the threat was far from over. The initial siege had revealed the strength of their alliance. The morning had tested them not only physically but psychologically, showing that survival on the frontier required not just courage but strategy, adaptability, and the ability to inspire caution even in the hearts of those who sought to harm them. The morning siege had ended, but the danger was far from over. The settlers, frustrated and suspicious, had begun to withdraw slightly. Yet the young hunter knew their retreat was only temporary. They would return, better organized and perhaps more aggressive. He turned to the Navajo woman, who had observed every movement of the settlers with keen attention. Both understood that staying in the cabin, however fortified, would eventually become a death trap. Escape, though fraught with risk, was the only viable option. The hunter began mapping out their route, using his intimate knowledge of the forest to identify paths the settlers were unlikely to track. He pointed out natural features, dense undergrowth, fallen logs, narrow ravines that could provide cover, and slow pursuers. The woman listened carefully, offering suggestions drawn from her own understanding of the land and the ways of traveling undetected. Their collaboration, born of necessity, demonstrated a growing synergy. Each relied on the other's strengths. His knowledge of survival tactics and forest navigation, her instinctive understanding of stealth and the subtleties of movement preparation was meticulous. They gathered what supplies they could carry: dried meat, water, a few essentials for survival, and the hunter's weapons. Every step had to be calculated. Every noise minimized. The woman's nimbleness and quiet movements complemented the hunter's methodical precision, allowing them to leave almost no trace of their departure. As the first light of morning shifted higher, they slipped through the cabin door and melted into the forest, becoming shadows among shadows. The chase that followed was tense and relentless. The settlers, realizing the hunter and the woman had escaped, began pursuing them through the dense forest. Branches scratched their faces, underbrush tangled their legs, and the uneven terrain made every step a test of endurance. Yet the hunter and the woman moved with practiced skill, ducking behind trees, leaping over fallen logs, and using the natural contours of the land to their advantage at every turn. The hunter anticipated the settlers' movements, laying subtle traps, loose stones, tripwires, and misleading tracks that slowed and frustrated their pursuers during brief pauses. The woman and hunter communicated in low whispers, coordinating their next moves. She had learned to read the forest as he did, the subtle signs of recent footsteps, the faint echoes of distant voices, the changing patterns of bird calls that signaled human presence. Their trust in one another deepened with every shared glance and synchronized movement. Fear and adrenaline had transformed into mutual respect and a profound sense of partnership. The forest became a battlefield of wit and endurance. At one point they crossed a shallow stream, masking their scent and confusing the settlers who had been following their trail. They used the terrain creatively, climbing ridges to gain vantage points, descending into valleys to hide, and leveraging the density of the woods to evade detection. Each maneuver reinforced the hunter's skill and the woman's adaptability, proving that intelligence and preparation often outweighed brute strength. After hours of tense pursuit, the settlers began to lose ground, their frustration evident in their sloppy coordination. The hunter and the woman, though exhausted, had managed to maintain the upper hand. Finally, they reached a natural clearing where the forest opened into a wider, less predictable landscape. Here they paused, catching their breath, hearts pounding from the exertion and the constant vigilance required to survive. In that moment of respite, they realized something profound. Their shared struggle had transformed fear into courage, isolation into connection. The escape was more than physical. It was a testament to the bond they had forged under pressure. Survival had demanded cooperation, trust, and ingenuity, and through it, they had discovered a partnership that neither had anticipated as they prepared to move again, deeper into the forest. Both knew that the frontier was still perilous, but together, they were stronger than any danger that might come their way. After the exhausting flight through the forest, the young hunter and the Navajo woman finally reached a safer haven, a secluded valley far from the cabin. Hidden by dense groves of pines and the natural curves of the terrain, the air here was still and fragrant, carrying the scent of wildflowers and earth, a stark contrast to the tension and danger they had endured over the past day. For the first time since the Wolf attack, they allowed themselves a moment of respite, though both remained alert. Knowing that the frontier's dangers never fully disappeared, they set up a modest camp, using what remained of their supplies and the forest's resources. The hunter fashioned a small shelter against the trunk of a large tree, while the woman gathered water from a nearby stream and foraged for edible plants. The rhythm of these simple, practical tasks created a sense of normalcy, a reprieve from the adrenaline and fear that had dominated their recent hours. In the quiet moments, they reflected on the events that had brought them together: the Wolf attack, the tense night in the cabin, and the siege by the settlers. Each challenge had tested them physically and mentally, yet each had also strengthened the bond between them. Sitting beside the fire that evening, the woman spoke softly of her homeland, recounting stories of her family, her community, and the sacred landscape she had once called home. She shared the lessons she had learned from her people, the importance of harmony with nature, resilience in the face of adversity, and the strength found in cooperation. The hunter listened intently, absorbing not only the words but the wisdom and perspective they carried. In turn, he shared his experiences in the forest, the solitude that had shaped him, and the skills that had allowed him to survive against both nature and human threats. Through these exchanges, they recognized that while their worlds were different, they shared common values: courage, resourcefulness, and a deep respect for life. As night fell over the valley, they both contemplated the role of fate in their meeting. Neither had anticipated that a single act of bravery, rescuing the woman from a wolf pack, would irrevocably alter their lives. Yet, in retrospect, the danger and adversity had forged an unexpected alliance, a partnership built on trust, mutual reliance, and the understanding that survival often demanded both courage and empathy. They had navigated a world rife with threats and emerged not only alive, but strengthened in spirit and character the next morning. They observed the forest from a vantage point, ensuring no immediate threats remained the settlers. Discouraged by the forest's complexity and their inability to track the duo, were unlikely to pursue them further. At least for the moment, this allowed the hunter and the woman to consider the future. Not only in terms of survival, but in terms of choice. They had learned that safety, trust, and companionship were invaluable in a frontier world that often offered only solitude and uncertainty in their shared silence. Both felt a sense of transformation. The woman, once vulnerable and alone, had discovered a protector and ally capable of navigating the harsh realities of the wilderness. The hunter, who had long relied solely on his own skills and judgment, had found someone whose insight, adaptability, and courage complemented his own. Their experiences together had demonstrated the power of cooperation and the strength that comes from mutual trust. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the valley in warm, golden light, they packed their belongings and prepared to continue their journey while the immediate danger of the settlers had passed. The frontier remained unpredictable. Yet they faced it together, no longer as strangers bound by circumstance, but as partners united by experience. Respect and shared resilience, their bond, forged in the crucible of survival, would guide them through future challenges, reminding them that even in the wildest, most dangerous places, trust and courage could create safety, hope, and the possibility of a new beginning.